evening, curious minds of the interwebs. I'm Alexa, the resident ooky spooky girly, and today we're diving back into the topic of places you should maybe consider not visiting if you have respect for the dead and value your own life. You know, simple stuff, really. Question for y'all: what's the craziest curse you've ever heard of? Let me know in the comments, and here are the top 5 scary tombs that released ancient curses. Number 5. King Tut. The Curse of the Pharaohs, or the Mummies curse, is a curse alleged to be cast upon anyone who disturbs the mummy of an ancient Egyptian, especially a pharaoh. This curse, which does not differentiate between thieves or archaeologists, is claimed to cause bad luck, illness, or death. The tomb of Tutankhamun, or King Tut for short, was discovered in the Valley of the Kings in 1922 by excavators led by the Egyptologist Howard Carter and his friend George Herbert, otherwise known as Lord Carnarvon, more than 3,300 years after King Tut's death and burial. Whereas the tombs of most pharaohs were plundered by grave robbers in ancient times, Tut's tomb was hidden by debris for most of its existence and therefore not extensively robbed. The unexpectedly rich burial consisted of more than 5,000 objects, many of which were in a highly fragile state, so conserving the burial goods for removal from the tomb required an unprecedented effort. It thus became the first known, largely intact royal burial from ancient Egypt. To date, the discovery of the tomb is widely considered one of the most famous archaeological discoveries of all time. The opulence of the burial goods inspired a media frenzy and popularized ancient Egyptian-inspired designs with the Western public. To the Egyptians, who had recently become partially independent of British rule, the tomb became a symbol of national pride, strengthening Pharaonism, a nationalist ideology that emphasized modern Egypt's ties to the ancient civilization, and creating friction between Egyptians and the British-led excavation team. Just 2 months after opening the tomb to the public, George Herbert was dead of red body fluid poisoning from a mosquito bite on his cheek. Several people, such as the author Marie Corelli and a psychic known as Cairo, claimed to have warned George of mortal peril before his death. Arthur Weigel, a former Egyptologist who served as the Daily Mail correspondent on the tomb, said he had observed George joking as he entered the tomb and remarked, "If he goes down in that spirit, I give him 6 weeks to live." George's son and heir, Henry, said that Cairo suffered a power outage at the moment of his father's death, and in England, his father's dog let out a howl and died at the same time. Another such story, recounted by those involved in the excavation, involved a canary that Howard Carter had bought at the beginning of the digging season. Initially, the Egyptian workmen regarded the bird as a sign of good luck, and when the tomb was discovered, they dubbed it the Tomb of the Bird. When a cobra entered Howard's house and ate the canary, the Egyptians then called it an ill omen, relating the intruding animal to Uraeus, the protective cobra emblem on the brow of King Tut's statues. When George A. Gold, who had visited the tomb, died the following May, his death was also attributed to the curse, as was that of Aubrey Herbert, George's half-brother, in September. Later additions to the list of cursed deaths included those of Mace in 1928, George's secretary Richard Berthel in 1929, and Weigel in 1934, along with Sir Archibald Douglas Reed, a radiologist who examined the mummy. And still for others, a slew of bad luck awaited them. Howard's friend, Sir Bruce Ingram, had his house burned down and later fled, thanks to a gift he was given that came from the tomb. Honestly, this is enough for me to never want to disturb a tomb in my lifetime, but let's move on and strengthen my argument. Number 4. Tamerlane. In June of 1941, Mikhail Gerasimov, a Soviet scientist, wanted to dig up the conqueror Tamerlane to reconstruct his face. That was his kind of thing as a doctor. He pioneered the field of paleoanthropology, which is just a very scholarly way of saying reconstructing the dead. Hey, it's a lot better than what a lot of other doctors were specializing in at that time. Local residents and Muslim clergy tried to stop the excavations, but the expedition continued its work despite everything. Tash Mohammed Kari-Niyazov was the leader of the expedition, which, other than Mikhail, also included the writer and historian Sadrian Aini, the famous Orientalist A. Semenov, and M. Gerasimov, along with a young cinematographer by the name of Malik Kayumov. These excavations were mainly aimed to examine the human remains in the tombs and to prove that they belonged to Tamerlane and his closest relatives. The group first opened the tombs of Ulugh-Bek's son, and then the tomb of Timur's sons, Miran Shah and Shahrukh. On June 18th, they discovered the remains of Ulugh-Bek, the grandson of Timur, and on June 19th, the heavy gravestone was taken from the Tamerlane's tomb. All this was done while ignoring 2 consecutive warnings on the tomb itself. The first warning was inscribed in plain sight and well known, saying, "When I rise from the dead, the world shall tremble." The second was a surprise, hidden within the tomb itself, reading, "Whomsoever opens my tomb shall unleash an invader more terrible than I." Well, finally on June 20th, the tomb of Tamerlane was opened, and the mausoleum was filled with a sharp choking odor of the mixture of resins, camphor, rose, and frankincense. It should be noted that Tamerlane died in Otrar on his way to China, so to be buried in Samarkand, he had to be embalmed. 3 days later, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa and invaded Russia. Few would argue that the evil German dictator would qualify as an invader more terrible than Tamerlane. Those that dispute the curse point out that Operation Barbarossa was already planned and underway before the invasion of Russia. Of course, sure, you can argue that. But you also have to note that in 1942, when the body was finally returned and buried with full Islamic rites, the Battle of Stalingrad changed the course of the war for the Russians. Number 3. Casimir IV Jagiellon. I'm not even gonna try to pronounce that again. The first time was bad enough, so from here on out he will be referred to as King C for my ease of being. Poland has a bit of a broken and weird history as a nation, but one of their brightest eras came thanks in part to King C. Under his reign, he famously subdued the Teutonic Knights once and for all, and fought hard to retain the union between Poland and Lithuania, all the while recovering lost lands taken from previous kings. His efforts were largely successful, thus ranking him as one of Poland's most notable leaders. King C was eventually interred at Wawel Cathedral in Krakow. The tomb is a late Gothic masterpiece made from mainly red marble from Adnet, near Salzburg. It is composed of a sarcophagus, over which was sculpted a canopy and supported by ornate arches. The inside of the canopy was lined with limestone and includes a late Gothic crown. The nature of the sculpting of the crown and arches echoes the ornate carving of wooden altarpieces at the time. The arches are supported by marble pillars, the capitals of which feature biblical scenes. A full-length sculpted effigy of Casimir lies on top of the sarcophagus, and it's an unusual depiction. King C is presented as being in agony and is dressed in a clerical cloak only used at coronations. The sides of the sarcophagus bear the arms of King C's kingdoms and territories. In 1973, a group of archaeologists and researchers were eager to figure out more about the king's death nearly 500 years after his funeral, and they dug right in and opened it up like a Kinder egg. Unfortunately, things didn't go well for the excavation team. Unearthing the king under Wawel Chapel was easy enough, but it's the examination that started to claim so many lives. Even as it was in progress, those involved started to die from strokes and infections, and within days, 4 were dead. Within years, around 15 were dead. While it has since been proven that it was a fungus inside the coffin that was the cause of death, there's always a possibility that maybe, just maybe, it was something more sinister. Curses don't always have to present as a mysterious unknown. They can have explainable science behind them, for crying out loud. Number 2. Nostradamus. It's not surprising that the man who could predict the future sought to protect his resting place with a curse as well as a prediction of when his tomb would be raided. After all, nothing about Nostradamus is ever complete without a good prediction or two. So he was a French astrologer, apothecary, physician, and reputed seer, best known for his book Les Prophéties, which was published in 1555 and is a collection of 942 poetic quatrains allegedly predicting future events. Nostradamus' father's family had originally been Jewish, but had converted to Catholic Christianity a generation before he was born. He studied at the University of Avignon, but was forced to leave after just over a year when the university closed due to an outbreak of the plague. He worked as an apothecary for several years before entering the University of Montpellier, hoping to earn a doctorate, but was almost immediately expelled after his work, which at the time was forbidden by university statutes, was discovered. He first married in 1531, but his wife and 2 descendants died in 1533 during another plague outbreak. He fought alongside doctors against the plague before remarrying to Anne Ponsarde, with whom he had 6 descendants. He wrote an almanac for 1550, and as a result of its success, continued writing them for future years as he began working as an astrologer for various wealthy patrons. He suffered from severe gout towards the end of his life, which eventually developed into edema. In late June of 1566, he summoned his lawyers to draw up an extensive will bequeathing his property plus 3,444 crowns, which is around 300,000 American in today's currency, minus a few debts, to his wife pending her remarriage, in trust for her sons pending their 25th birthdays and her daughters pending their marriages. On the evening of July the 1st, he is alleged to have told his secretary, Jean de Chavigny, "You will not find me alive at sunrise." And what do you know? The next morning, he was reportedly found dead, lying on the floor next to his bed and a bench. He was buried in the local Franciscan chapel in Salon, but reinterred during the French Revolution in the Collégiale Saint-Laurent, where his tomb remains to this day. In a quintessential Nostradamus quatrain, he calls out whoever would dare disturb his tomb, he who will open the tomb found, and will come to close it promptly, evil will come to him, and one will be unable to prove if it would be better to be a Breton or a Norman king. A report from York University goes into detail about what just kind of happened when the tomb of Nostradamus was disturbed in 1793. In the heart of the French Revolution, French soldiers went after the fabled tomb, ignoring the supposed rumor that whoever opens the tomb would be, killed. It's said that the soldier who opened the tomb found a sign around Nostradamus' neck that predicted the exact date. After drinking wine out of his skull, the soldier was then killed by a stray bullet. Hey, that's what you get for messing with the wishes of the dead, my dude. Number 1. Mexico City mummies. Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History says the appearance of fungal growth on a traveling display is causing concern, and rightfully so. Known as the Mummies of Guanajuato, the exhibit made an appearance in the United States in 2009. But it was like a recent stop in Mexico City, showing off 6 mummies in glass cases that has led the Institute to alert the public, especially considering they don't know just how airtight those glass display cases really are, and that they're without warnings or safeguards against biohazards. From some of the published photos, at least one of the corpses on display, which was inspected in November of 2021, shows signs of a proliferation of possible fungus colonies. Now, if you remember the infections that have emerged from other tombs as revenge, I'm calling that for this one as well. Experts believe the 19th or 20th century corpses were unintentionally mummified as a possible byproduct of the mineral-rich environment, an airtight, dry underground burial vault, or some other environmental cause. Some of the mummies still have hair, skin, and even preserved clothing, but there's an obvious lack of embalming or other common mummification products. In the early 1900s, the poses and marketing of the mummy exhibit took on a distinct horror element. Some of the bodies were positioned with arms folded across chest and jaws in an open position to create the appearance that the mummies were screaming, which is extremely disrespectful to the dead. In February of 2022, an effort was launched to begin identifying the mummies, but nothing yet. While it isn't an obvious curse like some of the other spots I've spoken about today, I have a feeling any day now we're gonna learn more. And that brings us to the end of our time, and once again, I'm gonna emphasize this: leave the dead alone. Seriously, resting in peace ain't just a figure of speech. If you enjoyed my ramblings today, could you help us out by giving this video a like, subscribing if you aren't already, hit the bell for more cursed content from us here at Top 5 Scary Videos, and I'll see y'all next time, you lovely spooky people.